The morning began quietly, the kind of calm that came from years of routine. Margaret Collins stood by the kitchen window, watching light move slowly across the backyard. She liked mornings like this. It gave her time to think without pressure. Her life had been steady for a long time, built around responsibility and care. She was used to that. She believed she was done with surprises. That belief changed the day Ethan first stepped into her home. Emily, her daughter, had mentioned him before. A classmate. A friend who became something more. Margaret listened without asking too many questions. She trusted Emily's judgment. At 21, Emily was thoughtful, kind, and hopeful in ways Margaret no longer allowed herself to be. When Emily said she wanted to bring Ethan over for dinner, Margaret agreed without hesitation. Ethan arrived earlier than expected. Margaret opened the door and saw a young man standing straight, holding a small paper bag with bread from a local bakery. His smile was polite, not confident, but honest. He greeted her by name, not ma'am, and that small detail stayed with her longer than it should have. Dinner moved quickly. Conversation flowed easily. Ethan spoke with respect, listened carefully, and never tried to impress. Margaret noticed how he waited for Emily to finish her sentences instead of talking over her. She noticed how he thanked her for the meal as if it mattered. These things felt rare. Margaret told herself she was simply being a mother, that she was judging whether this young man was good enough for her daughter. That was all. But as days passed, Ethan became a regular presence in the house. He helped Emily study, fix small things without being asked, and treated the space like it mattered. Margaret began to sense a shift in herself, subtle but real. She felt more aware when he entered her room, more careful with her words, more awake. She did not like this awareness. It made her uncomfortable. Margaret had been alone for years. Not lonely, just alone. After her marriage ended quietly and without drama, she focused on raising Emily. She worked, paid bills, attended school, events, and built a life that made sense. Romance became something distant, something she remembered rather than expected. Ethan reminded her of feelings she thought were gone, not because he tried to, but because of who he was. One afternoon, Margaret returned early from work and found Ethan sitting at the dining table, reading while waiting for Emily. The house was quiet. He looked up, smiled, and stood out of respect. That simple action hit her harder than she expected. They talked for a few minutes. About school, about the weather, about nothing important. Yet the moment stayed with her long after Emily came home and filled the space with laughter. Margaret began to question herself. She asked why she felt this way. She searched for answers. That made sense. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was loneliness she refused to admit. Maybe it was seeing her daughter grow up and realizing how much time had passed. She reminded herself of the truth again and again. Ethan was Emily's boyfriend. He was part of her daughter's story, not hers. One evening, they sat together on the porch. The air was cool, the sky wide and open. Emily talked about her future with excitement that made Margaret proud. Graduate school, travel, a life bigger than the one Margaret had known at her age. Ethan listened, smiling softly, holding Emily's hand. Margaret watched them and felt two emotions at once, pride and something close to grief. When Emily stepped inside to take a call, silence settled between Margaret and Ethan. It was not awkward, just full. He looked at the horizon, then at Margaret, as if about to speak. She felt the moment stretch, fragile and dangerous. Margaret broke the silence first. She spoke about the weather, about nothing that mattered. Ethan nodded, respectful, unaware of the storm she was holding inside. When Emily returned, the moment passed. That night, Margaret lay awake. She did not imagine scenes. She did not cross lines in her mind. Instead, she felt the weight of choice. She understood that feelings could exist without action, but they still carried responsibility. She realized something important. What she felt was not about Ethan alone. It was about her own unfinished life, about parts of herself she had set aside. Ethan had simply reminded her they were still there. The next day, Margaret chose distance. Not coldness, but care. She kept conversations brief. She stayed busy. She reminded herself that loving someone sometimes meant protecting them from harm you could cause without meaning to. Ethan never noticed the shift, or if he did, he respected it. Margaret watched Emily laugh, grow, and love freely. And in that, she found her answer. She liked things the way they were. The quiet, the safety, the knowledge that she had done right. By her daughter, some feelings were meant to be felt, not followed. And Margaret understood that this was one of them. Margaret decided that distance would be her guide. Not avoidance, not cold silence, but a careful space where nothing could grow beyond control. She woke earlier, left the house before Emily and Ethan finished breakfast, and filled her evenings with errands or quiet walks. She told herself this was temporary, just until the feelings settled back into something manageable. But feelings did not disappear just because they were ignored. Ethan remained steady, unchanged. He greeted her kindly, thanked her for small things, and spoke to her with the same respect as always. He never crossed a line, never lingered too long, never said more than necessary. That made everything harder. If he had been careless, it would have been easier to dismiss him. Instead, he was consistent, and that consistency forced Margaret to face herself. Emily, full of plans and excitement, talked endlessly about the future. She spoke about moving to California after summer, about applying to programs, about building a life that felt wide and full. Margaret listened closely, storing every word like something precious. She realized that this season, this exact moment, would never come again. One afternoon, Margaret found herself alone in the house with Ethan again. Emily had gone out to meet a friend, leaving behind a quiet that felt heavier than before. Margaret considered leaving, but she stayed. Running forever was not strength. They spoke briefly, standing far apart, discussing a broken cabinet hinge. Ethan offered to fix it. Margaret agreed, watching as he worked carefully, focused, patient. She saw how he handled small problems without frustration, how he took his time. She thought of all the years she had done the same for Emily. When he finished, he stepped back and smiled, satisfied. "Should hold now," he said. "Thank you," Margaret replied. Her voice was calm, steadier than she felt. There was nothing else to say. And that was enough. Later that evening, Margaret sat alone in her room, reflecting. She understood that emotions were not wrong, but they were not instructions either. Life did not demand that every feeling be acted on. Some existed only to teach. She thought about love in all its forms, the love that holds on, and the love that lets go. She realized that maturity was not about having fewer emotions, but about choosing which ones deserved space. As summer moved forward, the house slowly changed. Boxes appeared in Emily's room. Papers were stacked on the kitchen table. Conversations shifted from dreams to plans. Margaret helped where she could, offering advice only when asked. She watched her daughter step closer to independence, and though it hurt, it also filled her with pride. Ethan was part of those plans. He talked about transferring schools, about finding work near Emily. His commitment was quiet but clear. Margaret saw the future forming in front of her, and she knew where she stood in it. One evening, close to the end of summer, the three of them shared dinner together. The mood was warm, filled with laughter and memories. Margaret felt something ease inside her. This was real. This was good. After dinner, Ethan stayed behind while Emily went to pack. He thanked Margaret again, this time more seriously. He spoke about how much Emily meant to him, how much he respected her, and how grateful he was for the home Margaret had built. Margaret listened, and in that moment, everything became clear. What she had felt was never a threat to her values. It was a reflection of them. She admired Ethan because he treated her daughter well. She felt drawn to his kindness because it mirrored the life she had lived: quiet strength, responsibility, care. She smiled, truly this time. "Take care of her," she said. "I will," Ethan replied without hesitation. When Emily and Ethan left for California days later, Margaret stood in the driveway and watched their car disappear down the road. The house felt empty in a new way, but not broken. It was simply entering another chapter. That night, Margaret sat with a cup of tea, surrounded by silence. She felt the weight of everything she had chosen not to do, and she felt proud. She had protected what mattered most. She had honored her role, her values, and her heart. Realized she had not lost anything. She had gained clarity. Margaret slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. In the months that followed, she rebuilt her routines. She joined a book club, traveled on weekends, and allowed herself to imagine a future that belonged only to her. The feelings she once feared softened into understanding. Some connections were not meant to change lives directly. Some were meant to remind us of who we are. And Margaret, standing strong in the quiet of her own life, finally understood that loving the right way sometimes meant stepping back and finding peace there.